I'm Joe Lample. When I created Growing a Greener World, I had one goal: to tell stories of everyday people, innovators, entrepreneurs, forward-thinking leaders who are all, in ways both big and small, dedicated to organic gardening and farming, lightening our footprint, conserving vital resources, protecting natural habitats, making a tangible difference for us all. They're real, they're passionate, they're all around us. They're the game changers who are literally growing a greener world and inspiring the rest of us to do the same. Growing a greener world, it's more than a movement, it's our mission. In this vast world of bees, there are thousands of species. They can be classified as either social or solitary bees. Social bees like honeybees, well, they live with thousands of others and they have very specific job duties. Solitary bees like mason bees, well, they live their entire life alone and yet they do all the work. Some of those duties include foraging and egg laying and nest building. Other unique and interesting facts about solitary mason bees: all females are queens, so all queens are worker bees. They're so gentle they rarely sting. Now, they don't make beeswax or honey, but the way they collect pollen is 30 to 60 times more efficient than honeybees. Backyard beekeeping has exploded in popularity in recent years, and a big part of the reason is due to the concern by many for the ongoing loss of a significant percentage of our honeybee population each year. But by adding a hive or two in our own yards, we're doing our part to help keep the population diversified and growing. Yet with all the popularity of raising honeybees, there's another kind of bee working behind the scenes that is incredibly efficient at pollination and without many of the mysterious problems associated with our honeybee crisis. What started out as a backyard hobby for Dave Hunter has grown into a passion and business for this Seattle solitary bee enthusiast. With a team of like-minded employees, they're helping to increase awareness of mason bees as a possible alternate pollinator to the world's commercial orchard and food producers. By encouraging gardeners everywhere to actively raise the easy-to-care-for mason bee, Dave may have discovered a way to help keep our food crops around the world productive while removing many of the stress and risks to honeybees used in commercial production.
So to actually talk about solitary bees is, first of all, what is it? Why does one say solitary bee? And to appreciate that is to understand the difference between a social and a solitary bee. A social, you're thinking of honeybee and bumblebees and hornets and wasps. They all work under one queen and they've got a big hive and they work together, they communicate. Whereas a solitary bee, every female's a queen. Okay? They only live 6 weeks. They come out of different parts of the year, but every female's a queen and she winds up just doing everything. And they work together. I say together, they're gregarious. A mason bee wants to be next to another mason bee or another solitary bee. But the biggest difference is there's no communication. They're just an individual bee doing their own thing by themselves. The solitary bees got a whole ton of species out there, but what we've been looking at specifically, if we narrow that down to a mason bee, these guys or these girls are bees that go into a hole that you can actually manage. You can actually move these around. You can hold the cocoons in your hands in the fall. But secondly, they're just an awesome pollinator. No honey, okay, so it's not a honeybee, but the way they pollinate is so much different than a honeybee. And this is actually the key piece. With a honeybee, as they're gathering their pollen, it's going on the back legs, and they've heard these honey pockets. Not much pollen falls off the honeybee, so few flowers are pollinated each day. With the mason bee, way different. Okay? The mason bee, she comes in and she belly flops and she's getting all this dry pollen on her abdomen, and off she goes to the next flower. She's getting the nectar while she's at it. Next flower, belly flop, nectar, and off she goes. Virtually every flower this bee touches is pollinated, and that's the key difference. They stay in a tight radius. You can hold them in your hands, but they are awesome pollinators. So in an orchard, you might need 20 to 30,000 honeybees to pollinate an acre. And on the mason bee side, really about 400 to 500 females. It's phenomenal, the difference. The honeybee is not doing well right now. You've got a variety of diseases and viruses. You've got the varroa mite, you have fungus. All these things are all working against the bee. From what I understand, the honeybee isn't diminishing as much because they're able to supplement it, they're able to add a lot of extra bees, so they're solving these things. but they're solving them on the surface. We're seeing a lot of the surface issues being analyzed, but the fundamental problem is probably where we're looking to help resolve. So this is the fun part of my little history, where I'm able to actually put a solution to food on the table. And so you can look back about 20 years ago, as an engineer, I'm seeing an unknown insect to me go into holes and supply pollination to my backyard. And 15 years later, I'm given time off, and I'm able to take this insect now that I understand, I'm learning it, but I'm able to see that as the honeybee continues to be challenged, gosh, here's this niche that I think we can actually put enough bees out there to keep food on the table. So we've started an organization that has scientists and researchers and people all putting things together. And so there's one side of it. We're learning the insect, but what we're also doing is teaching the backyard gardener how to be successful raising this. So it's not just food on the table for the orchards, it's food on the table in the backyard. And so you got this really cool insect. It's gentle. We're learning all we can and we're teaching all we can. And that's kind of one of the fun things about what we do in our company, is that we're able to teach people how to be successful, so successful that we're able to then take their excess bees and move them into the orchards. That's where we're at. So for the home gardener, this is a gentle bee that doesn't take any extra equipment, doesn't take any extra clothing. You can go out there with your shorts and they're just buzzing around your heads. These guys are an insect that just pollinates your fruit trees. It's a wonderful bee to go into. On the upside, there is no downside. It's just a bee that doesn't have any problems and it pollinates. We just find they're just a great insect.
Well, Dave, first of all, my compliments to you and your backyard, because I think if I were a solitary bee, I'd be very happy right here.
Well, there's a lot of pollen from as early as I can in the spring till way late fall. And what we find that pollen attracts bees. It's that simple.
And that comes from a diverse landscape. But you know, I have got that at my house, and I know a lot of people around the country are going to have a wide variety of plant material. So can we safely then say that we've got solitary bees in our landscape?
Well, out of the 4,000 species of bees that are across the U.S., we find that more than half of them are solitary. And so to actually look to your ground and to see down in the ground, you've got individual bees coming out of holes. Those are solitary bees in the ground. And to put up holes where they might nest into, reeds or paper tubes, has bees, if they're there, coming to use these to nest in.
But you talk about putting something up to see if they're there, but that doesn't mean that you have to do that. I think of it very much like a bluebird house. You put it up, you build it, and they will come, but if you don't put it up, it doesn't mean that they're not in the area.
That's exactly right, Joe.
Yeah. Now, Dave, as I'm sure you know, anybody that's ever raised honeybees or been around them for any length of time knows that golden rule. You never stand in front of the entrance to a honeybee hive, but that's clearly not the case with the solitary mason bee.
They're just so gentle.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what's going on here is that these females, they have a choice to either guard their hole with their bazooka or go out and do all the other chores, which is gathering pollen, laying their eggs, and sealing things with mud. So she can't do both, so she doesn't.
Because every female is a queen, so they have all of these jobs to do.
Right. And stinging someone else isn't there. They are a bee, they do have a stinger, but they're so gentle. If you can get stung, the venom is less than a mosquito bite, and the only way really to get stung is to squish them in your hand or maybe get them caught someplace deeper in clothes. But it doesn't hurt. They're just a gentle bee.
It's a non-issue. So if anybody ever wanted to raise bees, but they didn't for fear of being stung, this is the answer.
Okay, no honey, but these gentle bees are awesome pollinators.
Pretty good trade-off.
Yeah, exactly.
I find bees utterly fascinating, especially when you understand their life cycle, and you have some fantastic props to really bring that full circle.
Thanks, Joe. So actually what we're looking at here, these are harvested cocoons that have adult bees in them. A large cocoon is a female, and we've got a small little one here for a male. And these bees overwinter in cocoons through the whole process, through the whole winter. And then in the springtime, they're ready to come out. The males will exit first, and the females. And the females are using a hole such as this to lay their eggs in.
So this is a reed in this example, but this also applies to the in-ground solitary bees as well.
Exactly. They all gather pollen, lay an egg, and then seal that little chamber that keeps them waterproof through the whole winter.
Okay.
But so let's open this one up and kind of see what's in there. This was just finished a couple days ago, so we should find eggs inside here. And so here, so we see, well, we've got a little pollen around here,
okay.
But about 30 trips worth of pollen gathering has about a pea-sized bit of pollen.
Wow.
She's going to back in, lay an egg. See these little white spot right there?
Yes.
That's a egg that was laid. Females on the inside, males on the outside.
Wow.
And then she seals that little chamber with a bit of mud. In fact, we can see on this reed here where there's the mud. And it's pollen egg mud out there. And so in her lifespan, she's probably laid, probably 15 or so eggs between the two of these. She's dead after about 6 weeks, and these eggs will have hatched. The larva now consumes the pollen she left for them, and through the early part of summer just eats it, gets to be a big larva, and then through the probably late June, she has spun a cocoon and then metamorphosed into an adult bee to just sit through the winter again. So it's a simple process.
So in the fall, this is what you would see inside of the reed or the hole.
Exactly.
And so through the fall, into the winter, and back to spring, now these are emerging to start this process all over again.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it neat? I love it.
Unlike the social honeybee that lives in complex hives with up to 60,000 of its closest friends and family, the solitary mason bee is just that, living and working its entire life in isolation, and often doing so from a solitary enclosure that's no wider than a common drinking straw. And unlike the complex hives of a honeybee, the homemade mason bee habitat is remarkably easy to make, and yet there are some important considerations to ensure success. So talk to me about some of those steps to make sure that we're ensuring success for those bees.
Now, there's not very many. The mason bee is a generalist, so she's looking for pollen. And I'm saying from dandelions to fruit trees and everything in between.
So weeds are okay.
Weeds are fine. So they're generalists.
And a good diverse environment.
Correct.
Okay.
Next, they're looking for holes. So about a pencil-sized diameter, about maybe 6 inches long, is going to allow those bees to go in their nest. And we're looking for something that you can open up, a paper tube, a reed, or maybe wood trays that you can open up. Okay. Now these are going into a house, and the house just keeps the holes dry.
A shelter.
Right. About 2 or 3 inches of overhang. We're keeping it on a morning wall. We want the bees to be as active as early as possible.
Okay. Because the sunlight coming in from the east warms them up early, and it's the warm temperatures that gets them active early in the day.
Exactly,
Okay.
right. Now, one of the most critical pieces, mud. The mason bee uses clayey mud that she's pulling out of the ground, okay? So I'm gonna say finding a hole in the ground is probably the best. They're actually gonna be going through the side wall trying to capture that mud. Now, if you got a loamy or sandy
Which
soil.
is what I'm thinking. Somebody's watching this thinking, well, I just don't have that muddy situation at home at all.
Right, so in that case, I'm gonna say get the cheapest possible kitty litter you can. Rock bottom is clay-based.
Yeah.
Right. So you're not kind of getting that old gloopy, putting it on that side wall, and the water content should keep it moist enough. We think the bees would use that rather than fly off.
Okay.
All right. And then the last little piece that's now June, the bees are done. I want to protect those bees from the developing bees from birds and rodents
Predators.
or something. Right.
Yeah.
So we're going to take the full holes out and put them into a pillowcase, and put those in a garage or a shed, just someplace where it's warm. And then I want to replace those holes with smaller tubes for other nesting bees that could come out during the summer.
Okay, so you're just giving a new opportunity for more habitat and other insects to come up and take residence.
What we're looking for are the bees to thrive, not just survive.
Ah, I like that. As so many of us have set up certified wildlife habitats, there are certain steps we had to take to not only attract the wildlife, but once they came, make sure they had adequate food and shelter. Well, it's no different for the mason bee. There are specific steps that we can take to not only help them get to our place, but once they're there, give them everything they need for a safe and productive life cycle. First, add native plants to your landscape. The bees that come to live and work in your habitat thrive around native plants that have been a staple of their diet and nesting ritual for centuries. In addition, the bees that you attract by planting natives help reproduce more plants as they go from one to the other, collecting and depositing pollen. Next, consider reducing the size of your lawn. Then use the newfound space to add more habitat-building native plants. The more you provide of what bees want, the more likely they are to be attracted to your garden and landscape. And that's a win-win for you and the bees. Less lawns also means less potentially harmful lawn chemicals that can easily impact the bees and other wildlife. Grow more food, or even one edible plant. By growing food, you begin to understand the importance of pollination even more. For much of what we eat, pollination is the key to producing it. And without our bees to do that, we wouldn't have many of the foods we depend on every day. Another important step in creating a bee haven is to allow pests to survive. As odd as it sounds, by letting Mother Nature do your pest control for you, you avoid use of non-selective chemicals, which kill beneficial insects as well. Instead, by allowing pests in your garden and landscape, you provide a food source for beneficial insects, which not only take care of the problem naturally, but also help to keep our ecosystems in balance. And finally, raise more bees. By doing more to create a healthy habitat, bees will naturally be attracted to visit and live there. And by raising more bees, we take an active role in building their populations. A good way to do that is to make your own bee house. Now, certainly there are numerous self-contained systems that include everything from the outer housing to the chambers inside where the bees lay their eggs. But if you have a few basic tools, like a drill and a saw, for less than $5, you can make a complete system and be up and running in just about an hour. First, you'll need the chambers or tubes that the bees will use to lay their eggs and where the cocoons will overwinter. Tubes that you roll yourself from plain paper work great for this. Fold and cut sheets of discarded paper into quarter sections. Then, roll each piece around a pencil and tape the end. Remove the pencil and fold the other end over and staple or tape it closed. Make as many as you desire to place into the bee house. Making the bee house is a simple process as well. I used one untreated cedar fence board that I purchased for less than $3. From the top, I measured down 8 inches, but any length will work. I used a carpenter square to draw the lines to guide my cuts. I then used my saw to cut the first piece, which will serve as the back of the bee house. Next, I cut 2 more pieces to serve as the sides of the house. These were 8 inches as well. 3 more pieces of wood are all that's needed to complete the project. One for the top lid, which I cut to 6.5 inches to provide some overhang, and a bottom board, which I cut to 6 inches. Make sure the screws you select are weather resistant and thin enough so as not to split the narrow boards. With all the pieces cut, connecting the boards was quick and simple. A bead of caulk across the top seam will keep the lid watertight. The final step after mounting the house was to insert the paper tubes and place the last piece of wood, cut to 4 inches, to rest on top. This helps keep the tubes in place. Now, one final thought about using these homemade paper chambers. Like me, you might have thought, well, wouldn't it be just a lot easier to use plastic drinking straws and cut them down to size, and certainly would save a lot of time. But don't do it, and here's why. There are 3 things working against using plastic straws, and the first is this. Pollen has excess moisture, and you need those natural chambers to wick away that moisture, and with plastic, that's certainly not going to happen, and you would end up with moldy dead cocoons in the fall, and you certainly don't want that. Second, drinking straws tend to be the wrong size, including paper straws. But if you can find straws that a pencil slips into, that's good, but you still have an issue with not being able to harvest the cocoons, which you might want to consider doing to help expand the population of mason bees beyond your immediate area. and you can't get to the cocoons in a plastic straw without killing the bees. Perhaps the most important step in raising mason bees and building their population is the final step of the year, which happens in fall. This is where Dave and his team really focus on building the population with the help of people all over the country. So this is headquarters where the magic happens.
Yep, this is it.
So when you're not out on your deck enjoying your passion, you're in here working but also inspiring others to mason bees as well.
We're trying to help people be aware that there's something beyond the honeybee and the bumblebee. There's a gentle mason bee that they can raise.
Awareness is huge, and you do that through a robust website and email, B-mail actually, very clever by the way.
Yeah, thanks. Once a month, we're helping the gardener understand what to do. So it's April, this is the step, it's October, here's the step, because we realize the gardener has too much on their plate and they just forget.
Yeah.
So if we can remind them, we're handing them a little more success.
Well, and awareness is going to build desire, which you certainly have done with me. So the good thing is everything that I would need is here as well, so I can order that. But, you know, what does that cost?
Well, we've got reeds and houses and bees. In fact, we got bees that are acclimated to the gardener's area.
Hugely important.
It's important for that. So on the cost side, yeah, we've got low-cost houses that we feel bees and house, about $30 to get this to them. And on the higher end, we've got houses with tubes and reeds and bees for about $100.
Not bad either way. Now time, that's the other one I never have enough of, so there's a cost to that, but what are we talking there?
About 15 minutes total. Agreed. What we're asking is that the gardener gets the box.
Yeah.
They've opened up the box, they put their house outside and put the cocoons, they have the bees in it, into the house, and that's it. They stand back and let the bees do their thing.
So just to clarify, the cocoons are in a dormant state, but when
Correct.
you put them out and it's warm,
The bees are going to emerge from the cocoons and do their thing.
Very cool.
It's not that tough. So they're active for about 6 weeks. They've pollinated the people's backyard. They've got now food that they've been looking to raise, and they're done.
Okay, but let's fast forward to the fall, because that's really the essence of this business model. Walk me through that.
Okay. In the fall, we want the gardener to have been so successful that they've got an abundance of cocoons.
Right.
We want them keeping a lot for themselves, okay? But the excess we're going to buy back. Okay? We're taking these and we're going to rehome them to other gardeners so they can become more successful. And here's the point, we're going to be moving them into orchards because we want to supplement the honeybee.
Oh.
In fact, one of our problems we've got, as we're looking at all of our peers, we've got between all of our peers 4 to 5 million mason bees. That's it.
Under management.
Under management, right. But later, as we're analyzing, we're trying to help augment the orchards across North America, we think we need about 4 to 5 billion.
Wow.
Just a few decimal points off. Right. So the gardener holds the key to the success. If we can get enough gardeners raising these mason bees, we can then pull them into the orchards just to complete that full bridging the gap between orchard and the backyard gardener.
In essence, you're fostering new farmers who are sharing some of their bounty.
Exactly, right.
I like that.
My hope is that the backyard gardener becomes so successful raising mason bees that they have an abundance of bees. Later, these bees will be moved from the backyard gardens to the orchards to supplement the honeybees that's being challenged out there. It's all about protecting the food supply, keeping food on the table.
Well, I hope for many of you, today's topic on solitary and mason bees was an eye-opening experience. And perhaps for a few, we whet your appetite enough to want to raise important mason bees in your own backyard. But if you just want to learn more or perhaps review what you saw today, no problem. It's all on our website under the show notes for this episode. And that website address, it's the same as our show name. It's growingagreenerworld.com. Thank you for joining us, everybody. I'm Joe Lample, and we'll see you back here next time for more Growing a Greener World.